Well, today marks the Easter Sunday, also known as Pascha or Resurrection Sunday, a Christian holiday commemorating the resurrection of Jesus. It's described in the New Testament as having occurred on the third day of his burial following his crucifixion by the Romans at Calvary. But more significantly, the three Abrahamic faiths are considered this weekend to be especially sacred because it coincides with Ramadan, Passover, and Easter. Well, to tell us more about this, we're joined by Bishop Malusi Mpumlwana, who's the General Secretary of the South African Council of Churches. Bishop, thank you so much for your time and thank you for joining us this morning. Just talk to us about the significance of this weekend. I think we highlighted it in the intro, but I mean, when I was chatting to you earlier, you greeted me by using the words, "He is risen," you know, evoking the fact that Christ arose from the dead on Sunday. Talk to us about the significance of that.
Well, for Christians, it is so significant, particularly because the whole foundation of the Christian faith is based on the death and resurrection of Christ. And that is the reason why most churches worship on Sunday rather than on Saturday, because they celebrate this resurrection on an ongoing basis, week after week. But this particular one, it coincides with towards the end of the month of Ramadan for Muslims, as well as, of course, the traditional Passover celebration by the Jewish community. And so all Abrahamic faiths actually are in their holiest of times at this time during this weekend. And so it's very important for a large population of the world.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about the three Abrahamic faiths, and of course that includes Islam, it includes Judaism and Christianity. And so they find this convergence during the specific period of the year. But while we're, sort of commemorating this period of deep devotion and deep reflection, one can't help but take note of what's been happening in Jerusalem, the violence that's been spilling over there. What's your reaction when you think about the time we're in right now, what we ought to really be reflecting on, and what we're actually seeing as a reality unfolding in one of the holiest cities?
It's actually speaks exactly to this point because the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound is referred to by the Jewish community as as Temple Mount, and there are competing claims because both of these faiths consider that place as the holiest of their shrines. Pope Francis made a very significant point. He said that Jerusalem is the common patronage of the three Abrahamic faiths. And we believe at the South African Council of Churches that that really and truly the Holy Land is holy to people of faith, not to politicians and governments. And that therefore there is a need for a faith-led effort to try and bring some kind of common understanding of how we can all coexist with our faith interests in Jerusalem and the Holy Land. And that has not happened because it's been left to politicians to do this. It has become a secular political matter rather than a faith matter. And for this reason, year on year, there will always be contestation around that place. It's not this first time this year. Last year it happened. The year before it happened. Many people have died. Many people have been injured. In fact, last year, if not the year before, 300 Palestinians were arrested at the mosque. Yeah. And so it happens. It happens all the time. And the only way to deal with it is to really, first of all, we need to condemn that violence without equivocation. Have to, because it interferes with people worshipping. And if for Muslims, for people to walk in there, not only with guns and batons, but also with their boots, in a place where Muslims take off their shoes, it's sacrilegious. So it is terrible, but it has to be resolved. It's not going to stop until and unless there is a proper solution and recognition that is a place that really now needs to go to negotiations in order to be resolved. And of course, we have to accept that there is a growing, if incipient, plan, it seems to me, by Israel to actually nullify the idea of a two-state solution. That's what appears now to be the case, particularly with the laws that they have passed, which we believe are actually apartheid laws that define citizenship in terms of race. You've got to be Jewish in order to have the rights according to their recent nation-state basic law that they've passed on.
Yeah. You know, Bishop, you mentioned how this has become such a highly politicized conflict, but, one that is, of course, layered in religious texts and beliefs. How would a faith-based movement or response be able to succeed where, peace talks haven't necessarily? As I mentioned, we're talking about a decades-long conflict. Agreements have been put in place that have shifted and changed over time. We've had religious leaders come out and condemn what we've been seeing happening in Jerusalem, yourself included, other religious leaders across the global community. It hasn't seemed to have had much of an impact. How does a faith-based movement succeed where others have not?
Well, one of the things that we have to understand and maybe accept is that, Christians, many Christians in the world have this incorrect notion that the state of Israel is a continuation of the ancient Israel with the promises of Abraham and David. That is not true. This is a political formation. It has nothing to do with the Bible. This is, and it's almost like they're given the right to operate as if we are in the 4,000 years before Christ, where you can just run over and kill the Amalekites if you like, because God has told Joshua to do that. And that's what Israel is doing now. And in fact, the most atrocious law that they've passed, there are two laws. One that says that Israel belongs to the Jewish people. In other words, if you are a citizen of that country and you're not Jewish, you have no rights. It actually specifically says that self-determination belongs to Jewish people only. Then it goes on to say, pass on a law that says they can take what they call the historical land of Israel, which really means all the lands that were ever occupied by the kings of Israel in the past are now free to be taken by it. That might mean Syria, that might mean Lebanon, that might mean parts of Iraq, it might mean anything. And so it is terrible. It is, and the world is watching. All that the Christians in Palestine are saying, please, let's just accept that we are being punished for the sins of Europe. We want to live peacefully with Jews and Muslims, because they did before 1948. They did. And so it's possible we can get back to that if we put our minds to it. But we need Christians to understand that if they don't stand up for this, there will be no holy sites in Israel, in Palestine. There will be no Christians left in Palestine, because there are only so few and they are all Palestinians. Right.
Bishop, what's interesting about this round or this iteration of skirmishes, if I may put it that way, is the fact that while rhetoric between Israelis and Palestinians has escalated in terms of, how they violently attack each other, has escalated, what is different this time round is that is the background of Israel's own sort of, governmental crisis, governance crisis. With this new overhaul of the judicial system, it does seem that the Israeli government doesn't necessarily have the full backing of the Israeli people. I wonder if that would create enough of a space, enough of a vacuum, so to speak, to rally people of faiths against what we're seeing, these Israeli raids on the Al-Aqsa Mosque, as you've mentioned. Is that something that we could potentially be utilized to evoke more peace talks with regards to what's happening there?
It definitely does help in some way, but it doesn't really change very much because the current Netanyahu government is so far right. I mean, it's got a security minister who says there is no such a nation as Palestinians. It's got a finance minister who says there is no such a thing as Palestine. I mean, that's how bad it has become. And the good thing about the protest in Israel at this time is that they are protesting against the empowerment of government to override the Supreme Court. Now, why is that important? It's important because the Supreme Court is the only thing that stands between some of the most extreme legislation that can be passed by such a right-wing government and democracy, really. And why do they do this? It particularly says the Supreme Court may not change a basic law. I told you just now that there is a basic law. Israel doesn't have a constitution. So it has got a series of what they call basic laws. And each basic law has the value of a constitutional power. And so one of those basic laws is the one that I'm saying it's an apartheid law that says Israel belongs only to Jewish people. Now, a constitutional court or the Supreme Court could have changed that if these reforms that Netanyahu is doing were not done. So they are doing that in order to make sure that nothing ever changes. So it's very good that the people of Israel are objecting to this in their numbers, and we hope that that succeeds. And maybe, just maybe, within that context, we may be able to mount a campaign for the Vatican, the World Council of Churches, the world Jewish leaders, as well as the Muslim leaders of the world, particularly because the Grand Imam of Cairo had a pact with the Vatican for peace in the Middle East and everywhere. We know now that the American Jews are against what Netanyahu is doing. So it is creating some space, but I think we have to act very fast to move towards a peace effort that's led by people of faith in the world.
All right. Well, Bishop, thank you so much for coming onto our platform this morning and sharing your insights with us there. That was Bishop Malusi Mpumlwana, who is, of course, the General Secretary of the South African Council of Churches.